Politics, protests, and the freedom to assemble. We're joined today with Aubtin Heydari. He's a USC student who was seriously injured in the Unite to Right rally back in August. Stay tuned. This is The Chat. Well, Aubtin, thanks again for joining us today. I just wanted to start out by, first of all, if you could tell us about your recovery and how you've been doing since the events that happened in August.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me first. I've been recovering, as best as I can. Really am at the mercy of my body and my bones, but I've been doing well. It's been, I think, 5 weeks since my surgery, coming on 6. Actually, I think this might be the 6th week. And so now I can start putting weight on my foot, get 25% every week. So in 4 weeks, I'll be able to walk by myself, but I'll still be using assisting devices to make sure I don't develop a limp. But healing-wise, I've been doing well.
Definitely. Well, we wish you a speedy recovery, and we hope that goes really well.
Thank you.
So just as the events happened on that day in Charlottesville, can you kind of just describe how the day went briefly in the beginning?
Yeah, well, it was very tense, as you can imagine. Incredibly, calling it tense is an understatement. There's really no words to describe the atmosphere, just how much tension there was between the Unite the Right, the neo-Nazi, white supremacist, white nationalist side, and the counter-demonstrators, and even the police. There was a lot of weaponry there. So it was a very just tense environment for everybody. It's not comfortable to walk around and see like hundreds of assault rifles and not really know who's carrying them and why.
So from the start, did you feel like there was a real sense of danger? I know you've been involved in student protests in the past. Did you feel like this was a different protest, like there was a real threat of danger?
Oh yeah, this is a considerably different protest. A lot of my protest experience in Los Angeles has been very positive. When situations do get tense, it's usually between police trying to shut down the protests and like counter demonstrators. But there's very little, I think, very overt clash. At Charlottesville is incredibly different because it was like it was a counter-demonstration against a neo-Nazi white nationalist demonstration.
Right.
And so just the atmosphere from the beginning was considerably more intense. I started my day at I think it was one of the churches where a group of faith leaders in Black Lives Matter rented out their space in order for us to have sort of a base camp for activists to get coffee in the morning and group together. And even being with faith leaders, pastors, preachers and community activists, the situation was still very, very tense.
So that was the beginning of your day. You started out with there, and as the protests continued, you kind of made your way through Charlottesville. Were you kind of following the Unite to Right rally people?
Well, they had their own. I'm very familiar also with Charlottesville because I'm from the area,
okay.
And so I was already like really aware of what the layout of the town is and everything. It was more that we started at a park that was in the downtown mall area where everything happened. It was 2 blocks off, so I just had to march 2 blocks. What the Unite the Right people did is they had another park. I believe it was McIntyre. Which is a little further away, and they marched, and they had speeches there in the morning and marched from there to Freedom Park, which is where the Robert E. Lee statue is. So they had a march that they went, and we met them at where they were going to end.
Okay. And at what point were you on your way to that statue when that car hit your?
No, actually, we have been there for I think 2 hours. And then the police declared the rally unlawful assembly. So they were ordering people to disperse the park in the area. So that's when we all had to disperse. And what happened? And so actually, where the attack was on I think like 3rd Street and Water. Which is like on the other side of the downtown mall from where we were originally. The reason we were crossing the mall is because a group of activists had heard that members of like a neo-Nazi group were heading to a low-income housing project in order to intimidate and beat people. Okay. And so we were going there to try to help defend people, try to push them away, make sure they don't intimidate residents, and that's when the attack happened, was on the march there.
Okay, so you're on their way there, and again, you were one of the 19 people that
20.
were 20 people that were injured.
Well, 19 injured.
Yeah, 19 were injured, and one person was killed when that car ran into the crowd. Can you talk about why you think that happened, first of all, or what was the sense of, was there a sense of urgency to get out of the way? Did you see it happening?
Well, I don't remember the attack itself, because I think just the shock and concussion damage, that was like, my head was badly injured. And so I don't remember anything of that attack, aside from like vague recollections or senses or emotions. From the people I've talked to who were there, there was, I mean, a very intense sense of urgency once people realized what was happening and they heard the screeching of the car. So I knew that there were people people had told me that they were trying to get out of the way. And because there was so many people and this is such a small road, that was physically impossible to do. So people were getting pinned up against the wall trying to get out of the street.
So after this whole experience, you've obviously been seriously injured as a result of this protest. Have your ideas of protesting changed, or has your resolve to protest in a specific manner changed as a result of the events that happened?
I mean, well, I don't think I've changed any of my core fundamental ideals and my belief in the right to protest and the value of protest. I think that I've come to think certain things I hadn't before. I definitely feel much more strongly about weaponry not being at protests, or at least like guns, like rifles, assault rifles. And Virginia is an open carry state, so this was allowed to happen at open carry for rallies. But there's just no way, in my opinion, to and there was people on their side who had weapons, and people also on our side, community defense organizations that had weapons, and other militias that were there acting as sort of third parties. I just don't think that there's any way for the situation. The situation gets more tense when everybody has assault rifles. It just factually does. And I think that moving forward, that's something I feel much more differently about, is how it actually feels to be at a rally where hundreds of people have weapons and you don't know anything about them, and they could very well be neo-Nazis trying to kill you. I think that one of the other core realizations I've had is I think the need for safety at protests and the need for people to be safe and able to feel safe, and part of that comes with recognizing that these groups who show up, like the neo-fascist groups, the white supremacist groups, I mean, this is a real threat. Like, I think that this is something that keeps being slipped by or keeps being accepted as normal. That like, oh yeah, like, okay, sure, neo-Nazis are bad, right? But let's focus on this or that or all these other things. I mean, these neo-Nazi groups, some of them have been around for decades and have been committing terrorism for decades. Some of them are very new, but all of them are oriented very specifically towards intimidation and terror tactics. And I think that's very important for us to recognize that. And recognize that they don't really want peaceful protests. I mean, they've talked about like doing things like this before. If you look at some of the chat logs that have been leaked of Unite the Right organizers, they talked about running over protesters before the Charlottesville rally even happened.
Lots of violent rhetoric across the board in that protest. So if students want to still be involved and exercise their rights and be able to protest and be involved in these rallies, how would you suggest that they do so in a safe way where they don't end up in a situation like you were in?
Oh, well, it's very hard because no one plans to be in that situation. We certainly didn't think that was going to happen because this was after the rally had been dispersed. So we were away from these people in the first place, which is, I mean, I think the expectation was that if something were to happen, it would have happened in the rally and at the rally in the counter demonstration, not after things were dispersed. So at some sense, there is just a factual danger in being there. But I think it's so important for people to show up, and there are ways to do it safe. The most important thing is to show up with somebody, a close friend, someone you trust, someone who can check on your whereabouts, make sure you're safe, be a buddy for you, essentially. And also just take make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. It's a lot different to go to a, for instance, DACA rally in Pershing Square in downtown LA than to show up and counter-demonstrate against neo-Nazis and the KKK or anti-Muslim groups. And because these are different dynamics. And I think understanding those dynamics is important when you go in order to make sure that you're aware that this is a much more situation where I will face confrontation. And I think even then, just there's other things you can do in terms of having first aid equipment on you, having water on you, being aware and keen to your surroundings, and knowing how to escape if you need to escape.
Every rally is different, right?
Absolutely.
Definitely. Well, Aubtin, thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in to the chat.